Whether it's the end of a 7-hour-long game or a team losing their Stanley Cup hopes in the last minute for having an extra player on the ice, the NHL never failed to deliver. Here are 15 moments that still give us goosebumps. Number 15. Paul Henderson scores for Canada. It's still considered one of the most iconic goals in hockey history. Paul Henderson scored the game-winning goal with 34 seconds remaining in the 8th and final game of the Summit Series between Canada and the USSR. As a result, Team Canada, which was packed with the greatest players the NHL had to offer, won the series 4-3-1. The NHL Stars were greatly favored entering the series and needed to win the final 3 games to win. Any hockey fan old enough to remember where they were on September 28, 1972, gets chills just thinking about Paul Henderson's name. Number 14. Brett Hull wins the Cup for Dallas. In Game 6 of the 1999 Stanley Cup Final, Brett Hull scored one of the most contentious goals in Stanley Cup history, beating Dominik Hasek of the Buffalo Sabres in triple overtime to earn the Stars their sole league victory. The NHL established a zero-tolerance policy for offensive players in the crease that year. When Hull scored on his own rebound to deliver the Stanley Cup to Dallas, his skate was obviously in the crease. To Stars fans, the goal was historic. To Sabres fans, it should not have counted and continues to be a cause of pain. In any case, it was a thrilling moment in NHL history. Number 13. Ace Bailey shakes Eddie Shaw's hand. Ace Bailey's hockey career was interrupted on December 12, 1933 by Eddie Shaw in a violent stick-swinging altercation. Shaw nearly killed Bailey when he attacked the Maple Leafs player from behind, causing brain damage. Bailey recovered despite being so close to death. He was even read his final rites. The first NHL All-Star Game was actually a fundraiser for Bailey and his family to help pay for his medical expenses. Before the game, Shaw and Bailey clasped hands and hugged at center ice, indicating that peace has been restored between these two hockey titans following this heinous act. Both players were inducted into the Hockey Hall of Fame later in their careers. Number 12. The unofficial Eddie Jockerman night. Eddie Jockerman was one of the most popular players in New York Rangers history, and he supplied the Rangers with great goaltending for more than 10 years, helping them reach the playoffs for 8 straight seasons. In the fall of 1975, the Rangers began a rebuilding process, and after a bad start to the season, GM Emile Francis began to trade away some of his older players. Jockerman was waived and signed by the Detroit Red Wings on October 31, 1975. On November 2nd, Jockerman's first game with Detroit was against the Rangers at Madison Square Garden. The supporters applauded Jockerman throughout pre-game warm-ups, during the national anthem and during the game, chanting "Eddie, Eddie" to pay honor to a player who had given his all for them over the preceding decade. Jockerman had a strong game as the Wings defeated the Rangers 6-4. Ed Jockerman had the most unique and unofficial tribute night in NHL history along the road. Number 11. The Easter Epic. On April 18th and 19th, 1987, the Washington Capitals and the New York Islanders played a game for the ages. It is still the longest Game 7 in NHL playoff history. The teams finished regular knotted at 2-2. The first 3 overtime sessions were a goaltending duel between New York's Kelly Hrudey, 73 saves, and Washington's Bob Mason, 54 saves. The Islanders won the game and the series when Pat LaFontaine scored at the 8:47 mark of the 4th extra frame. Mason was screened during the play and did not see the puck coming. He fell to the ice when it went into the net, practically unable to move. The game began shortly after 7 p.m. on Saturday and ended at 1:58 a.m. on Easter Sunday. Finally, it was a test of endurance and a spectacular Game 7 that no one who witnessed it will ever forget. Number 10. Yaromir Yaga fakes out the Blackhawks. During the 1992 Stanley Cup Final, Yaromir Yaga made one of the most spectacular goals in NHL history against the Chicago Blackhawks. Yaga picked up the puck well inside the Chicago blue line, tricked off 4 Blackhawks defenders along the boards, cut across to the front of the net, and lifted a backhander past goalkeeper Eddie Belfour before the final Chicago defender arrived. The Penguins trailed 4-1 at one point in the game before rallying to win the game and their second Stanley Cup in a row. Mario Lemieux described it as the most spectacular goal he had ever witnessed. Number 9. Ray Bork wins the Cup for the first time. Ray Bork spent over 21 years with the Boston Bruins, filling those years with consistently superb play that cemented his place in the Hockey Hall of Fame. Despite playing in nearly 180 playoff games for the Bruins, Bork had never played for a Stanley Cup winner and was aware that his career was coming to an end. The Bruins traded Bork to the Colorado Avalanche in 2000, and 1 later in his final season, Bork won the Stanley Cup. Bork was also not a passenger that year. He had 4 goals and 10 points in 21 playoff games. When it was Bork's turn to hold the Stanley Cup, he took it to Boston, where 20,000 people gathered to commemorate the occasion. Just like Bork won fans' hearts, you can also win our hearts, and it's as simple as subscribing to our channel. Number 8. Bob Nystrom gives the Islanders their first Stanley Cup. Bob Nystrom's overtime goal at 7-11 gave the New York Islanders their first Stanley Cup triumph. It happened in the 6th game of the 1980 Stanley Cup final against the Philadelphia Flyers. The Islanders were the poorest single-season record in NHL history when they joined the league in 1972-73. They immediately rose to prominence in the league, coming within 1 game of reaching the Stanley Cup final in only their 3rd season. After crushing playoff defeats at the hands of the Maple Leafs 1978 and Rangers 1979, Nystrom's goal gave the Islanders their first championship. It marked the beginning of a dynasty for the Isles, who went on to win 4 successive Stanley Cups from 1980 to 1983. Number 7. Mario Lemieux is back after surviving cancer. In 1992-93, Mario Lemieux was at the pinnacle of his powers when he disclosed mid-season that he had cancer and would be missing time from hockey to undergo radiation treatments. If he had stayed healthy that year, Mario the Magnificent may have challenged Wayne Gretzky's single-season records for 92 goals and 215 points. Lemieux made his first public appearance following cancer treatment in Philadelphia, home of the dreaded Flyers. Instead of criticizing their intrastate opponent's captain and leader, Flyers supporters gave Super Mario a standing ovation when he returned to the ice for pre-game warm-ups. Lemieux scored a goal and assisted on another, almost as if he hadn't missed a beat. That season, he helped the Penguins achieve the league's best record. For a brief time, the rivalry between the Penguins and Flyers was set aside, and Philadelphia supporters applauded Pittsburgh's captain's bravery and endurance, which transcended the game of hockey. Number 6. Too many men sinks the Bruins. On March 10, 1979, the Bruins finally got the Montreal Canadiens where they wanted them in Game 7 of the NHL semi-finals. Boston, which had lost in the Stanley Cup final to the Habs the previous 2 seasons, led by a goal with just a few minutes remaining at the Forum in Montreal. All was well until Don Cherry's team was called for too many men on the ice, and the Canadiens tied the game on the penalty play with just 1 minute and 14 remaining on the clock. The goal was scored by the great Guy Lafleur in a give-and-go rush that beat a disheartened Gilly Gilbert. Montreal went on to win the game in overtime and the Stanley Cup for the 4th time in a row. Number 5. On-Ice Miracle. It is still remembered as the most dramatic event in American hockey history. A group of unknown college hockey players upset the Soviet team, which had only 1 year previously defeated a team of NHL All-Stars in a 3-game series. Herb Brooks shaped and guided the team to victory, uniting them in their hatred for him. On February 22, 1980, goalie Jim Craig contributed to the Americans' victory over the Soviet Union. The final score was 4-3, with Mike Ruzioni scoring the game-winning goal. The Americans won the gold medal 2 days later after defeating Finland. Any American hockey fan can still feel the goosebumps from Al Michaels' final call. Number 4. Bobby Hull scores 51. Bobby Hull became the first player in NHL history to score more than 50 goals in a single season on March 12, 1966. The previous record, held by Maurice Richard and Bernie Geoffrion, was 50. The goal came against the New York Rangers at Chicago Stadium, and the crowd gave the Golden Jet a 7-minute standing ovation. Hull had 54 goals for that season. Number 3. Wayne Gretzky scores 50 goals in 39 games. With the Edmonton Oilers in the early 1980s, Wayne Gretzky demolished the NHL record book. On December 30, 1981, the Great One was closing in on Rocket Richard's 1944-45 record of 50 goals in 50 games, which Mike Bossy had matched in 1980-81. In only 39 games, Gretzky broke the record. He scored 5 goals in the Oilers' 7-5 triumph over the Philadelphia Flyers in their 39th game of the season. The winning goal was scored into an empty net in the last seconds of the game. The record still remains after 40 years. Number 2. Mark Messier delivers the Stanley Cup to Broadway. The New York Rangers had not won the Stanley Cup in 54 years. Since 1940, so many Hall of Famers had attempted and failed to bring the cup back to New York. Andy Bathgate, Boom Boom Geoffrion, Rod Gilbert, Brad Park, Jean Rattel, Phil Esposito, Marcel Dion, and Guy Lafleur had all attempted and failed. But it wasn't until 1994 that Mark Messier returned the elusive trophy to Broadway. His famous guarantee in Game 6 of the Eastern Conference Final against New Jersey was a highlight, as was Stéphane Matteau's double overtime goal in Game 7 of that series. The Rangers led Vancouver 3-1 in the final, but the Canucks won Games 5 and 6 to force a Game 7 at Madison Square Garden. The Rangers won 3-2 to win the Stanley Cup for the first time. "The one will last a lifetime," claimed announcer Sam Rosen. Number 1. Bobby Orr flies through the air. Bobby Orr leaping through the air after scoring the Stanley Cup winning goal in overtime of Game 4 of the 1970 final against the St. Louis Blues is the most iconic photograph in hockey history. It featured the greatest player of his time at his peak, helping the Bruins win their first Stanley Cup since 1941. It truly demonstrated why Orr was unique. He had just skated circles around the opposition, who had only caught up to him and tripped him after he had scored the game-winning goal. Orr received the Conn Smythe Trophy in 1970 and again in 1972 when he guided the Bruins to another Stanley Cup victory. He is still regarded as the finest defenseman in NHL history. For more great NHL moments, we suggest clicking the video on the screen to watch more great NHL moments.